Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 408, and my guest is Patrick Erlandson. Patrick began leading the prevention subcommittee of the Long Beach Human Trafficking Task Force in 2012. He founded FatherCon, which, quote, focuses on an investment in fathers to be mindful and present in the home, reducing the threat of trafficking, unquote. He also founded the See It, End It Film and Arts Festival, which you can find on Film Freeway. I put a link. He is the leader of Men Standing Against Trafficking and has been working diligently to end this multi-billion-dollar global industry. And I cannot stress this enough. If you see something, say something, it's better to be wrong than let someone slip away. And I think now more than ever, we all have to be looking out for each other. If you need help or someone you know needs help, in the United States, you can text the word HELP, H-E-L-P, or info, I-N-F-O, to Be Free. And that text number is 233-733, or you can just text it to the words Be Free. And I put internationally the human trafficking reporting, and if you need help, if you need services, there's a ton of different countries listed on a link that I put on the links page for this episode. And obviously, it's a trigger warning for this episode because we do discuss human trafficking. It's an important episode, and I hope that it can save your life, can save the life of someone you know, can save the life of a stranger, can help a kid. At this point, we have to have each other's backs. This industry is huge. When I say multi-billion, that is not hyperbole. It's a huge industry, and we have to stop it. We have to stop it. All right. General stuff. I'm on Patreon at Susan Ruthism. Check out heyhumanpodcast.com for links and to learn more about my guests and the show, especially this one. Again, there's a lot of resource material. Check out susanruth.com to learn more about me and my other artistic endeavors. Follow Susan Ruthism and Hey Human Podcast on social media. Find my albums on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever you get your music. Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening. Be safe, be well, take care of each other, be love. Here we go. Patrick Erlandson, welcome to Hey Human.
It's so great to be here, being a human.
We met at the premiere of Maya, a movie about human trafficking and domestic violence. It's an intense movie, and you're a producer on that film?
No, but I'm on the board of Julia's Artists for Change. And so I've been engaged in that. I work in the prevention of human trafficking, so that's how Julia and I got teamed up, and love working with her and really love the film.
Yeah. Before we get into all the things that you do now, I want to know about where you came from and where you were raised and what shaped you.
Yeah, I love that you asked that question of everyone. So I'm from here. Actually, I grew up in Westchester, originally Westchester, and then our family moved to San Pedro. So my father was a professor at Loyola Marymount University. I have 6 brothers and sisters. Our family's just kind of really interesting, very diverse. My mom was not supposed to live through the night. Her mother didn't even know she was pregnant and got knocked down by a wave in Santa Monica and taken immediately to the hospital. And they shared the news with her that she was 5 months pregnant and the baby had to come out now. So she was born at like 2.1 pounds or something. And this was in 1923. So you didn't have the technology of today. And the doctor told everyone, yeah, she's not going to make it through the night. And she did, and she went on to have 8 children. I have a brother who died when he was 2 and I was 1. But so there's 7 of us that survived. And my mom was hysterical. My wife and I live with her and take care of her now, and she just turned 100 in December. Yeah.
I need to interview her.
She's a trip. But she just keeps saying, when I get to heaven, I'm going to look up that doctor and tell him how wrong he was.
Wow. Sounds like she really wanted to be on the planet.
Yeah, she did. And a bunch of us did too. I was almost born in the parking lot of the Kaiser Hospital, like at 5 a.m. I was the one who was the most eager to get out and start breathing.
How did your brother pass away?
He had a brain tumor,
Oh my
and
gosh.
they discovered it when he was about 1.5, and so he lasted another 6 months, and then he was gone. So I don't have memories of him, but my older brother does. My older brother used to go stand in the window, and because he went to the hospital and never came home, and so he has memories of just standing in the window waiting for his brother to come back. And at that time, they didn't take us to the funeral or anything, so there was no kind of closure there. But so my childhood was interesting, then moving in the 4th grade to San Pedro, a whole new environment. We were kind of popular in Westchester, and now you moved into an environment where we were nothing, no friends, you're starting at the bottom. But I think, growing up, one of my things that I'm most grateful for in my parents is that they allowed me to hitchhike across the country by myself when I was, 16, 17. I took a trip when I was 17 for 5 weeks before, becoming a senior in high school. And I traveled all over across the United States, up into Canada, back across Canada. And that was the best education I got. I've always, I grew up in an academic kind of setting at home, but I don't really like school very much. And even I'm a teacher now. I teach English as a second language. I do private tutoring and stuff now. I love teaching. I love learning, but I never really liked school that much. But hitchhiking was, man, you get in a car with someone, you have absolutely know nothing about them. And you might be together I was with one guy for 5 days. He gave me a ride all the way up into Canada and halfway across Canada. So you never know, what unfolds. You're going to open that door and it's this total beautiful mystery, what is this person going to be like? I got a ride all the way across South Dakota with a truck driver. We had probably nothing in common. And we talked for 3 hours. It was just like this incredible curiosity about people that developed in me. And I love that about myself. I love that I'm really curious. I love people. And I've been now all over the world, in Africa and South America and Israel and Cambodia and Thailand. And I lived in Japan for 8 years. And, those experiences hitchhiking really laid a foundation for my life.
That is incredible. I would not recommend that to any of my listeners today. However, did you happen upon anyone in those travels that you thought, oh, this might be my last car ride? Or
No, what was funny though was I was listening to your interview with Will Ferrell, and he said the same thing. You get picked up by gay salesmen, and they put their hand on your leg and invite you to come over and spend the night. And you say
Mike Farrell.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
That's tickled me because it was the same experience I had. Hitchhiking through Ohio, and a traveling salesman picks you up. But actually, I never had a really bad experience. And it's I think that's the thing that kids are missing today too, is you trust your instinct, and if something feels off, you don't take the ride or you don't go someplace. But you don't develop that unless you actually have the chance to. And I think with modern parenting, where people are so tightly controlling what their kids do. I was living in Japan, and the first time I heard the term play date, I was totally I thought that was as unreal as all the different ways you could get coffee done in Starbucks. It's like a skinny latte with oat milk and, 3 shots of espresso and some cinnamon powder on top. I just thought that was a joke when I saw it in a movie. But you have now parents that are just arranging their children's playtime, which, for my generation, we got on a bicycle. Our mother would say, "Be home for dinner," and you were gone. And when you got thirsty, you drank out of somebody's hose.
Yeah, my generation too. That was like that.
Yeah.
Through the work you do now, it can be a pretty terrifying place, especially for females. I would be playing. I remember one time I was playing in my front yard. It was summer. My parents had set up a water spout game where you could jump around in the water. I'm in my little bathing suit. I was probably 8. And some guy pulled up in the car into the grass a little bit and said, "Excuse me." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Do you know what time it is?" And I walked up and looked in the window to tell him I didn't have a watch. He was masturbating, and that's one of a bazillion things that my friends and myself have experienced over our lifetime. So I think it is a little bit different for men.
But also boys, it does happen to boys. And I think that's overlooked a lot, is there's a lot of sexual abuse of boys, and it does impact their entire lives. It impacts, so many of the decisions that they make.
Sure.
when I was leading Men Standing Against Trafficking. So we would stand on the track, which is where trafficked people are being sold. And I led this for 4 years. Once a month, we were out on the street corner, and the idea was really to send a message to the girls that not all men were customers, because in their minds, they have judges and police officers and teachers. I mean, they see it all, and so in their mind, it's like every single guy is a potential customer. And we wanted to send a message that that's not true. That not all men, buy other human beings, to do their thing with, and that there are people that actually care about what's happening to them. And also to send a message to the buyers. We have men that are coming up, and you see a bunch of men standing there pricking your conscience. And hopefully it was that, think about this again before you do this. You had said something about the danger, right? And then that really came up a lot when I was there, because I had this father stopped once. I was standing there, and this father comes screeching into the parking lot, and he gets out of the car, and he's got tears in his eyes. And he goes, "I did everything right. I had worked 2 jobs so I could buy a house. I bought a house for my family so my kids could grow up in a home of their own. And, it's really close to the school. They can walk to school." But he didn't know that area was a blade. It was a track where trafficking is happening. So every day his 12-year-old is walking to school, men are pulling up and offering her money for sex and trying to get her in their cars. And he was just so heartbroken that his daughter is now afraid to go to school because this is the environment, in that neighborhood. And I think at that time too, one of the deepest experiences I had was, a car pulled into the parking lot. This woman got out and came right up into my face. And she just looks me in the eyes and she goes, "Thank you." And it was kind of like I was like, yeah, okay, I'm backing up saying you're welcome. I don't know for what, but and then she tells me that 5 years before, she was being sold on that street corner by her trafficker. And the last customer that she had pulled out a knife and stabbed her and dumped her in the gutter to die. And somebody actually saw her and got her to a hospital and saved her life. These are the kind of experiences that have really kind of driven me to do the work that I do now, which is working to prevent some of this horror.
How do you go from kid hitchhiking across America, big family, and all that, to now being involved in the work? Where was the transition into the work?
So I'd come back from living in Japan. I used to run an art gallery in Texas, and we moved to Japan. I started teaching English, kind of shifting career, and I really love teaching. I teach reading, so I get to read a lot of books with kids and with adults too, and which I really love. But anyway, coming back to America, my wife and we opened a thrift store. My wife is Japanese, by the way, and we have 2 daughters that are magnificent. And so we opened a thrift store to support projects in Africa. My wife has worked, 4 times she's gone to Africa, to Niger, where there's like 1 doctor for 50,000 people. It's like a, pretty tragic situation. And that was a really deep experience. When we were living in Japan, my wife went to go work for a year in Africa. And so I'm struggling trying to learn Japanese and raise 2 daughters. It was a beautiful thing because, we'd have a map of Africa. My wife would send pictures back, and my kids were going, why the hell do we have to eat your cooking and not mom's? It's sit there and explain, there are kids in Africa that don't have any choice about not having a mother or a father. Their situation is so much more difficult. And so your mother is there because, she really feels she wants to do something for these kids. So, we can make that sacrifice, right? We can go without her for a little while so that someone else can be blessed, and that was a beautiful time. But so coming back to Los Angeles, I started teaching again. We had the thrift store, and then the owner wanted to sell the building. We lost everything. It was one of those stories. But then I went back to teaching, and right around 2009, the United Nations Refugee Agency opened an office in Los Angeles, and they wanted people to help because it was right around the time of the Arab Spring, and so there were 40 million new refugees, pouring out of countries, like Libya and Egypt, and all of the countries that were having this disruption through the Arab Spring was driving all these people out of their homes and out of the lives that they had known.
Can you tell people what Arab Spring is?
Yeah, so it was started in Tanzania. I think you had all these dictatorships. You had Gaddafi. You had in Egypt. You had these 40-year, 20-year, 30-year dictatorships. And people were lacking in just really basic freedoms. And there was a man who started it all. He was a business owner, and I think he was being taxed so heavily. There was all these restrictions coming from the government on his business, and he set himself on fire very dramatically, drawing attention to what was happening. And that ignited all of these people in these countries, and they started using social media to organize demonstrations against the governments. And it brought down, like, I think there were 3 or 4 countries where the governments changed. It spread into Syria, where, it was like running into a rock in Assad, who decided that he would rather, bomb his own people, and he wasn't going to give up his hold on power. So it kind of stopped at Syria, but there were all these countries in northern Africa and that experienced a liberation and new governments coming in. So it was called the Arab Spring, because it occurred where all these people suddenly had hope that their governments and their lives could be different and could be better. But it caused this massive influx of refugees and displaced people. So I applied for this job to work with UNHCR. And I got it. And so I worked there for a couple of years. But the thing that really impacted me from that time was getting field reports from agents on the ground in Egypt and in Eastern Africa. And at that time, you had the Darfur region. You had the Janjaweed coming down and slaughtering people and removing children, taking them for slaves. At that time in Khartoum, you still had slave auctions in the capital city. It just crazy stuff was happening. But these children were escaping to try to get to Israel, crossing Egypt, because they heard that refugees would be taken care of, they would be given jobs in Israel. So they would cross the border, and then there was a group of Bedouins. There were several things that they did, but the one that we were told that really turned my life around was kids escaping from seeing their parents killed or having their parents send them away, hoping that they would be safe. And then Bedouins inviting them in, feeding them, welcoming them, while all the while, unbeknownst to the children, they were sending for a doctor from Cairo who would come down, drug them, and then cut out their organs while they were still alive and bury them in the desert. And there was something about that story, the betrayal of children, that just slammed into my heart. And it was like, that was this pivotal point where I just started researching everything I could find on human trafficking, and everything from child soldiers to forced marriages, child brides, the labor trafficking, which is just horrendous, and then the sex trafficking, which is very prevalent in the United States. And I started to meet people, who had been victimized here. A 12-year-old girl in Fresno who's being sold in gas station bathrooms to men, and while she's still wearing, she's wearing cartoon underwear, and she's being used by men in a stinky bathroom. There was just learning about these things that are happening to human beings here in our neighborhoods. Just sent me on a spiral to where I learned everything I could. I started a website to kind of connect people to human trafficking events that are happening in Southern California. So that got me into where I was meeting all the organizations, meeting survivors. That led to even meeting buyers and meeting former traffickers. So things started to progress then from that point. And this became something that I just couldn't not do something about. I don't know if you have that experience where something confronts you in your life unexpectedly, and it's kind of like, I cannot live with myself if I don't do something here.
That's why Hey Human exists, is it's trying to find a way to answer the inhumanity of man.
Yeah, and I've seen a little bit too much of that. But also the other side. And I think, when you're dealing with something as dark as this, there's light in the amazing human beings that are taking this on and care about complete and total strangers, even when there's absolutely zero in the way of reward for what they're doing. And for so many of the people that are taking on this kind of work, the rewards are thin, and especially if you're working on kind of a rescue restoration side of things. If you're helping people get out of, it's called the life, but it closely resembles death. But it's the life of being forced to be used by men for someone else's, financial gain. The whole thing is a $150 billion industry globally as far as human trafficking.
How do you fight that, especially when the money is king, money is everything? How do you fight against that?
Well, there is a little thing called love that actually disrupts the thing called money. And I think what I found in interviewing so many girls and in some boys too that had been trafficked, but what I found, there was always this father connection. There was something there. There was, whether it was a divorce, whether it was a father who abused them, whether it was a father who trafficked them, in worst cases. But there was always this father component. And so that's what I kept coming back to. And so I felt in 2018, I'd been already, doing prevention of human trafficking work since about 2011. We were putting on kind of large events, in Long Beach. I was working at the Long Beach Human Trafficking Task Force at that time. And I was the head of the prevention subcommittee of the task force. And so I was really looking, how do we go upstream? How do we get ahead of this? How do we deal with the vulnerability that's making kids so accessible? The internet's made them accessible to any predator and anyone who wants to use them, but the vulnerability is coming from our homes. And so the more I kept digging, and the more I would finding these two forces. There was culture. There was a culture that was normalizing using human beings and was increasing a sense of entitlement. It's in advertising. If you listen to commercials and see how many times it tells you that you deserve something. Who the hell decided that I deserve whiter teeth? Or hair that doesn't turn gray, or a faster internet, but we're constantly being bombarded with these messages that we deserve something more than what we have. And then you enter into that, you put pornography. Pornography is 24/7 on every smartphone, every device. And it's constantly telling you that you should be having this amazing sex life. You should be able to do this and do that and do all of these things, that in many cases they're so completely unrealistic. Like the imagery and the video in the porn industry, it's completely unrealistic, but you're feeding this sense of entitlement, and that this is what your life should be like. This is the experience you should be having. And there's no obligation to consider what this means to the other person. So the thing with porn is it's a completely one-sided benefit. I'm going to get my pleasure from whatever is happening to you, be it misogynistic, be it violent, be it humiliation, be it, gang rape. Whatever it is, but that's all there for my entertainment and my pleasure. And I don't have to give a whit about what that means to you or what's happening to your body. You combine that with the advertising, political messaging that we don't need to be responsible for anything. We should be getting, free everything. It's just this constant messaging of entitlement. And what I found was the more you focus on entitlement, that makes you think about what you don't have. So it's a focus on loss, not on what you actually do have, which means you stop being grateful for what you do have, which in my life experience, gratitude is the most powerful thing that we can embrace. And even in very difficult times, even in suffering times, but when you have a heart of gratitude, it's like it sees you through so much. And I think from a faith experience, it's like that's our connection to God, is this sense of, I'm so grateful that I'm alive. I'm so grateful I live in this magnificent world. And yeah, there's dark stuff happening, but man, I'm so grateful that I'm alive. That sense of gratitude is what diminishes very rapidly when you focus on entitlement and what you feel you deserve. And so I started looking at that, and the cultural messaging is around that. So whether it's pornography or whether it's just advertising, but we're constantly being fed a message that you deserve more. Your life should have more glitter and more glamour than it does right now.
Well, I know that children are definitely into pornography, and they've done all this research and shown that as young as 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds are starting to become addicted to porn, which is so terrifying and horrific. I do believe that we should have universal health care. That's an entitlement I would like to see happen. That's a whole other story.
I get it. There are things that just totally make sense for having a more healthy life. I get that. But the thing that concerned me was this other side of entitlement, where you're constantly making people feel like their life is not good enough. It's not, they don't have enough stuff. They don't have.
And you think that leads to people human trafficking, or is that your correlation?
Absolutely, because it feeds an appetite. So there's a friend of mine who works in the red light district in Bangkok, and there's all these Western men that come there, and they're having sex with 12-year-old boys, and they're not gay. It's just that porn has rewired their appetite. So they have this curiosity about experiencing the things that they've seen in porn. And it's just, it has a powerful impact of rewiring your brain. And one of the problems now we have with teenage boys is they can't get an erection with an actual human being, because now their brain is completely wired around images on a screen. And so it's having devastating effect. I did one presentation once just on incest porn, and there's like a 4,000% increase in incest porn. And that became the number one searched for genre among millennials. And it's like, And and then so if you're an adult and you can kind of process things and see things in some context, well, it's not quite as damaging. But if you're an 8-year-old and you're seeing a brother and sister having sex, you're seeing a mother and daughter, or mother and son, or father and son or daughter. I mean, it's you're seeing this images very graphically. And as an 8 or 9 or 10-year-old, and you're trying to deal with being, like what the heck is this world that I'm living in, and you're getting that influence. This is one reason why we're seeing, I mean, in the UK, it's like a 400% increase in child-on-child sexual assault. Canada has the same thing. In the United States, Heidi Olson she's a forensic nurse who works in a hospital that's has the 5th largest number of rape cases and sexual abuse cases. And she said the largest demographic of perpetrators of sexual violence now are between 11 and 15-year-old boys. And it's all because of porn. That's the only common denominator, is that they're seeing porn and they're acting it out on their little sister or on a classmate. And so we're seeing a rise in this kind of behavior.
I read a statistic the other day. Men anonymously, if they could have sex with someone under the age of, I think it was 15, so like a child basically, would they do it if they knew they wouldn't get caught? And 70%. More than 70% said yes.
Yeah, they did a similar thing, I think, at UCLA, where they did a study of if you could rape someone. I think it was around rape, but if you could force a woman and you were guaranteed not to get caught, would you do it? And it was something like 60%, or it was like, yeah, it's really disturbing. But I find a lot of that sense of entitlement to use another human being sexually that way is coming from porn. It's porn is normalizing seeing a person as an object, and all the gratification is in one direction. It's all to the viewer. I mean, not everyone who looks at porn is going to go out and pay for sex. Not everyone who looks at porn is going to become this evil person. And
it does rewire your brain, though. I do believe that.
It absolutely does. And especially now you have interactive, I mean, it's much more interactive. And I think the algorithms, I was trying to find green shoes. Don't ask me why. You start searching for green shoes, and all of a sudden you're getting bombarded with ads for green shoes. And every company that makes a green shoe has somehow got your email address, but porn takes that a step further. And it's like, so once you start looking at something and it's registering how many seconds you're watching a particular content, and then it's going to start feeding you more extreme content. And what they've done studies where they've shown a guy is exposed to some kind of content, and immediately it's like, God, I don't want to see that. And they just buzz right past it. A year later, they'll be looking for it. So it's like the progression down and the need for novelty and things that are more and more extreme is because of what happens to your brain. Your dopamine is totally like just flooding your brain with stimulation when you see this kind of content. And then it turns it off. And so it's too much. So the receptors begin to restrict the release of dopamine. And so then you have to go to more extreme content to get that to open up again. And so the whole way it works in your brain is pushing you to more and more extreme content, and which means more violent content, which means more humiliation-based content. And so then you're this is being normalized in your brain. And so you're sitting there having a conversation with a woman and you're imagining what it would be like. People are starting to recognize like these dangers, and there's more and more people that are raising the alarm. And, things like, I have a friend in Canada, he's been working really hard on age verification. Pornography, all you do is click on a button that says you're 18 and you get access to everything. And so what's keeping 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds and kids from looking? This is one side, is this entitlement that's coming from our culture. So I organized a film and art festival. So we had two festivals that were around film, music, dance, visual arts, everything, but around this theme of raising awareness of human trafficking. And that's what connected me to Julia Verdin and Artists for Change and other filmmakers that were starting to deal with these issues. But the other side was the family, and it was what's happening within our homes and within the families that's creating a vulnerability to the enticements of traffickers online. And it's somewhere between 45% up to 80% of now the grooming and the initial contact and grooming of children for sexual exploitation is happening online. That means we have children who are in their home, with their parents in the other room watching TV, if they have two parents, and they're engaging with somebody who's has these designs on them and will tell them what they need to hear, what they want to hear in order to get their hooks in them. And one of the problems with human trafficking now is that the people who are being victimized don't see themselves as victims because the trafficker does such a good job of making them feel like they really care about them. And this is something for their benefit.
I have friends who are sex workers, and they, I think across the board, were all sexually assaulted by a family member, mostly fathers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it was something like that. The one study that was done showed it was over 90% of people that were in sex work or were trafficked had some sexual abuse or something that disrupted their normal development as a human being and how we see intimacy and how we see ourselves and our relationship to others. And that's absolutely true. And then the problem, I think, is with boys is boys don't talk about it. And if they do talk about it, a lot of times they get shut down. The wife is not going to believe that her husband is raping their little boy. That is too much for that mother to process. And so that happens many times where a boy tries to tell someone something that's happening and he gets shot down and he realizes, man, you keep your mouth shut. One of the guys I worked with when we were standing, on the street corner, this guy I worked with for a long time, and he was just a great guy. But it turns out one day he just started telling me a story, and he was raped repeatedly by his older brother when he was little. And that experience made him question himself because, your body physiologically, you're going to respond to someone's touch, right? And so then it just threw him into all this questioning about who he was. And so he ended up joining the Marines. He made all of these life choices based on what had happened to him when he was 5.
He went to hypermasculine to try and compensate.
Exactly. And that's happening to so many men. There's another family that I was taking care of. The wife is Japanese. So we had actually met her parents when we lived in Japan. And so we had this connection to them. And they had a little girl and a little boy. And the husband, as it turns out, the husband, who's American, had been sexually abused by his mother pretty deeply when he was young. And so as soon as he was old enough, he was out of the house and gone. But he never healed. He never confronted what happened to him. He never healed from it. So all of a sudden, he has a boy who's the same age he was when he was being molested by his mother. And he is totally triggered. And so he starts looking at child porn. And like his way of dealing with the trigger was watching child porn. I can't get into his mind, but that's what he was doing to try to relieve this pressure that was in him. Then somebody blackmailed him, so he got extorted. You pay me a bunch of money, or I'm going to expose that you're looking at this content. So he ended up going to his wife and telling her what had happened to him as a child. He kind of exposed himself, told everything, and then he went into the garage and killed himself. And so now he has a son and a daughter who are left without their dad. The daughter was, I believe she was 11 or 12 at the time. And she starts just acting out. I mean, she's violent, leaving the house in the middle of the night and stealing alcohol and looking for boys to be with. Very self-destructive behavior. The boy becomes completely withdrawn. And the mother is told that she shouldn't tell the kids the truth. So she tells them that her father died of a heart attack, and the daughter's getting worse and worse and worse. And so then, and I met with her, we talked, and I told her, you need to tell the truth, to your daughter in an age appropriate way, but you need to tell the truth to your daughter. And that was just my gut reaction from knowing the daughter and knowing her. And she didn't do it at first, but things went on to a point where the daughter exploded and kind of violently with the mother. The mother ran out of the house bleeding and told the neighbor. The neighbor came over to talk to the daughter. And then she came out and said the same thing. You got to tell her the truth. So the mother then sits down with the daughter and tells her, yeah, your father committed suicide. He did it because he thought this was the only way to protect us as his family, the ones that he loved. And it wasn't, And so she had this conversation. The daughter says, yeah, I know. I saw the death certificate. So this whole time, the mother's lying to the daughter at a time when the daughter was grieving and really needed to hear the truth and needed some context for her suffering. And it was such a healing moment for them. And now, God, it's just like the daughter's doing so well. I mean, just from that point on, she just became a different person. But what really struck me, I was talking to the mother one day, and it's like she said her husband never would bathe the children. He would never do anything intimate with the kids. And she thought, oh, it's just, I guess, American men. American men just don't do that. But it was like, you always hear this expression that hurt people hurt other people. This is just bantered around. And it's, I think data-wise, it's about 10% of people who are abused or something go on to become abusers. But what happens to those other 90%? A lot of those other people who are not becoming abusers are terrified that they're going to become abusers. And so they're constantly kind of controlling themselves and restricting themselves from things that are, would be basic and normal because of that experience. So it manifests in a different way. But this is one of the things that, so in my organization with FatherCon, our hope is really we can create more environments for men to really be honest about what they've experienced and start to look at themselves in a way in relation to having children, because this is where we end up with multi-generational trauma. As you have something happens, it's not healed, it's not confronted, it's not dealt with. And so then it's being, transferred down to the children in a variety of ways.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be physical. My mother suffered from abuse and incestual abuse, and it, destroyed her. And as a young child, she would say inappropriate things to me and to my brother and to my dad, and just because she was bringing her own trauma and putting it on us. But what that does to us as kids, especially to me as a girl, I was the youngest, or I am the youngest, and she would say such inappropriate, gross things to us and accuse us of things. And it's because she never went to therapy. She never dealt with her trauma. And that really caused a lot of problems in my family.
Yeah.
She has mental illness on top of it all, probably as a result of her abuse. And it's not just physical stuff, but the mental fuckery that happens in a house where someone has been abused turns into other kinds of abuse.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I think that was last year. FatherCon, we have a conference, like once a year, and it pulls together. We have men come from the Palisades and from Watts. We have Huntington Beach and Compton. It's a really an amazing gathering of not just men, not just fathers, but it's father-centered. So it's really looking at the significant role that a father plays. What are the benefits of a father that are not there with a single mother? They're not there in a mother. There's a Dr. Manchin, I think she wrote a book called The Life of Dad, and she's an evolutionary anthropologist, and she talks about how evolution despises redundancy, and if the role of the father and the mother were interchangeable, this doesn't make sense on an evolutionary level, and that the father provides things that a mother doesn't. They're both absolutely vital. They're both important in how a child develops. And when I started FatherCon in 2018, there was this pushback because a lot of the women working in the prevention of human trafficking or working with survivors were single mothers. And as soon as you start talking about the importance of the father, they start feeling like you're saying that I'm not good enough. And I was like, no, that's absolutely not at all, what we're saying, by recognizing and by looking at all the data around fatherhood and how important it is, and the unique things that a father brings to a child's development. It's not saying that you weren't adequate, it's, that you weren't enough. It's saying that we're designed. There's this amazing kind of design to human beings, and what makes us healthy and whole is this like a two-parent environment. It's incredibly unfortunate. We have there's 100 million single mothers in the world today. Just last May, I was invited to Vienna to the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, which is over human trafficking. And they have a commission on crime prevention and criminal justice. And so I was one of the speakers in a side event, but then I got invited to speak to the whole plenary session of all the delegates from the world. And I spoke about this, you're looking at decreasing poverty, decreasing, lack of education, and dealing with criminal behavior and violent behavior in children. All three of those are linked to having a present father. The rates are, it's 20 times the rate to be incarcerated if you're growing up without a father in the home. You're 5 times more likely to live in poverty.
That's if the father is a decent father, I suppose, because there's a lot of really terrible dads and terrible moms out there.
There are. And the optimum situation is a really healthy father and mother who really love each other and set the best possible example for their kids. That is by far the healthiest situation for a child to grow up in. And that number is shrinking. But I got to be friends with Laura King, who's Rodney King's daughter. And the reason I reached out to her was because she has this scholarship to keep African-American fathers connected to their kids. And there are men who are bad husbands, who are lousy husbands, but they're really good fathers, and they're needed by their kids. And so this idea that my kids are better off without me is one of the cons. Like father con, the con is that we're being deceived. We're being told something else is going to make us happy more than actually being a good husband and a supportive present father. So that's where the con comes from. But with Laura, Rodney King had his demons, and he was really struggling with drugs and the things that he was going through on a personal level. But he was a really good dad, and he was there for her every event that she had, sports, whatever it was that she was doing. He was always there for her, and not just for her, but she had friends who didn't have dads, and he would buy them school supplies, and he would help take care of them. I love that about the story about him, because most people, all we know about Rodney King is, drugs, police brutality, and riots. I mean, that's pretty much wraps up Rodney King. And maybe can't we all get along? But I mean, his heart as a father was really beautiful, and had this lasting impact on not only Laura, who's very active in her community and serving others. She said it's because of her dad. None of that came from her mom. It all came from her dad. And I think we, even if you're not necessarily the best guy or you're struggling with things, the role of the father is still very important. The speed with which we dissolve, marriages and we kick men out of even having access to children is creating some of the problems we're dealing with on a social level. And we need to really start to look at, what fatherhood means and the impact that a father has. One study, there was a long study, a 26-year study that was done on empathy. And it was very, very interesting that actually children learn empathy more from the father than the mother, which kind of seemed very counterintuitive to me. But I really started to look at it, and what are the consequences of that? So and a lot of it is in the way that a father plays with his kids. Father play is really, really important. But what happens with a lot of mothers is that they start shutting down the father. It's like, you're getting the kid all wound up. Somebody's going to get hurt. Stop that. When actually the way that a father plays is really important for the development of empathy and a lot of other things, risk-taking, not being afraid of the world, being more self-confident, being able to speak up for yourself. A lot of these things come from the father more than from the mother. But this thing of empathy really kind of fascinates me. And then, part of it can be in this dynamic where the father's willing to allow someone to get hurt more than the mother. Mothers tend to want to protect. They don't want children to get hurt. A father's willing to let someone get hurt and then, okay, brush it off. Come on, stand back up again, keep going. And those things are all really valuable experiences for children. But one thing that struck me is like, if you have siblings, so the boy wants to get the attention of his dad. So he's like relishing in this playtime with dad. And the little sister comes along and she's joining in. So the little boy will push his sister down to the ground. And then the father says, no, you can't do that. Don't hurt your sister. But the boy wants all the attention. So then the father will say, look, if you can't take care of your sister, you can't stop hurting her. Well, then I'm not going to play with you anymore. And that causes the child then on a very subconscious level, he's going, man, I have to be aware of other people's feelings or I'm not going to be able to play with dad. And so there's all these things that come from the way that fathers play with their children. And then if you look at the data on why we have like 80% or 75, 80% of the men who are in prison came out of fatherless homes or situations where they were deprived of having a father. And so if empathy really does come more from the father, the mother lives empathy. The mother sets this example of empathy, and generalizations here, but if the mother's really kind of this living example of empathy, but the children learn it in their engagement with the father, that kind of, there's a link between not having empathy and criminal behavior that lands you in prison. And I know that criminal justice is a mess, and there's a lot of factors, but there certainly is data on how many men are in prison who came out of fatherless situations, and the attraction to gangs where you're looking for some kind of, familial, life experience and group to belong to.
I mean, my generation and your generation probably, I would consider feral children. We raised each other. The door opened in the morning, you got thrown out, and you, as you said, if you were thirsty, you drank from the hose. If you were hungry, you picked berries or whatever, or you maybe saved your allowance or whatnot. But you and your friends and yourself, that's who you had for the whole day, and you were learning off of each other.
That's exactly right. And kids are not having that experience anymore. There a lot of playtime has been removed, and it's replaced with a device, because that keeps kids quiet. But they're not really learning the things they really need to learn. I was reading recently about fatherhood, and they were saying that the three things that kids need growing up are danger, discovery, and dirt.
I agree with that for sure.
So do I.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's important for anyone listening, especially those who have children, but adults get trafficked as well.
They do.
And I think there's an idea that men are traffickers, but women are also traffickers, that only girls are taken, but no, boys and men are taken. So can we get a little bit into maybe some warning signs, things that people can look for that maybe they can help protect their own?
I mean, and one just additional comment about the boys being trafficked. Interpol did this, in their data collection. What they found was that boys are treated much worse than girls, by and large. Like when they're used in pornography as children, the things that they have boys do is extremely violent and destructive. A little bit even more so than for girls, but that was what the conclusion that they came to. And there is an increase. There's an increasing number of boys now that are getting trafficked. Yeah, I mean, as there's an increase in women looking at porn. Before it was pretty much male dominated viewership, and now they're creating more porn content for women, and that's having other. There's a huge increase now in infidelity among wives. So they're then going outside of their marriage, having relationships outside of marriage, and it's on the back of this, pornography. And we are so incredibly beautiful, and we are designed for such goodness. I mean, that's the thing that just blows my mind, is that even, chemically, biologically, psychologically, we're designed for a very different environment than we're living in. And you have children that are trying to make sense of a world that doesn't make sense to our brains. Trauma exists when you try to make something do what it's not designed to do. You try to take a car, make a turn at 200 miles an hour, and you're not going to look pretty afterwards. And we're doing the same thing. Children are not meant to grow up in an environment where they're being exposed to parents who lie to them or abuse them, or our brains just are not equipped for that. So these things are traumatic experiences that then impact our lives. So anyway, some of the signs I think for human trafficking, it's changing because of the nature of the internet. So you have children who are identifying as having a boyfriend. I mean, that's really on the rise, that this idea that this person understands you better than your parents do. And so they're much more willing to listen to, and they want to go and spend time with this person online who is actually grooming them to be exploited. And so there's a lot more of that. And I think in Maya, you saw that in the film Maya with the guy who reaches out to her. He starts preparing this relationship where she starts trusting him and seeing him as the person who's going to, save her from this, her mother's boyfriend. And all of that stuff is extremely real, and it's hard to break those bonds because it's kind of like Stockholm syndrome on steroids. This guy has been your protector, so you have a very complicated relationship with this person who's telling you to go out and sleep with 10 men and bring him all the money, and that this is so that you can have this beautiful future together. And so you have this need for someone to love you, and especially, and this is where Father kind of feel. This is why I felt this is important, because especially if you haven't had any kind of healthy male love, if you've never had the experience of being loved by someone who's not trying to get anything from you, but really cares about you and supports you, you are very vulnerable to someone making promises. So one of the signs is you have a child who becomes very obsessed with an online relationship where they're willing to cut out their other friends. They no longer need anybody else. They only need this one person. And one of the things with traffickers is they glean every ounce of information they can get from the target. So they know everything about you. They know that you love your little brother. They know that you go to this school and that you hate this teacher. All of that becomes weaponized in the hands of someone, a predator, or someone who's trying to exploit, that target. So all the information is one way. The trafficker very seldom gives any information about himself. And so there was one case in I think in Riverside where the daughter was just obsessed with going to meet this guy. And so the mother said, okay, that's, you have this relationship, fine. Well, invite him over here for dinner first. So before you can go out with him, he can come over here and, we can have dinner together so we can meet him. So the girl tries that. She invites the guy to come over, and he's not interested at all in that. And then the mother says, well, tell me about him. Did he go to university? Did he, does he have a job? What does he do? And that put the girl in this position where she's going, actually, I don't know anything about this guy, and all of a sudden there it was. And so when she went back and tried to start asking him questions, he disappeared. He was gone. And so the mother was very sharp. And I think that's, too many parents try to shut their kids down and take away their phones. And all that does is put them in a panic, and they'll find other ways, to maintain the relationship. But a lot of it is a change in behavior where someone becomes very all important to them. Signs like they start having things that weren't bought for by the parents or some other channel, but they start having especially more expensive things, having a second phone, having an iPad that they didn't have before. Like all of those things are, if there's anything sketchy in the behavior around those things, usually they become very protective, they're defensive, especially when it comes to children. They start showing signs of keeping secrets from the parents. And this is where, to me, the greatest protection you can provide children is really work on yourself to become a trustworthy person so that your children can then trust you. Children today, they want genuineness. They want something to be real, and they want their relationship with their parents to be real. And if they sense that you're lying and you're fudging and you're, not really being honest with them, they'll gravitate to someone who they feel is being more honest with them. If they can't have an open conversation with their parents, they are really adrift in a world where there are, predators.
I'm a big fan of honesty. I think kids can smell bullshit a mile away.
It's really true. There are so many alternatives now. There are so many alternatives to talking to your parents. Before you'd had maybe a teacher, or you had someone in your, an uncle or somebody in your physical, geographic realm. But now, you can be talking to 3 dudes in Nigeria and think you're talking to a 10-year-old girl. It's just everything has changed. And now, this thing with sextortion, where you have, boys enticing girls to share, naked images of themselves, share a picture or do something on a video. And it's amazing how quickly girls will do that. And increasingly boys as well, expose yourself online because someone's asking you. The danger of today is that children are living in a world that's fractured. There's the online world and there's the physical world. We have this very weird relationship with the screen. This is something that's only partly real. It's partly not real. And it's private. It's my personal space. I can say things and do things that I wouldn't do in person. And so you have children who now have this like fractured reality where they're living in 2 different worlds, and parents don't understand that and don't realize what that means to them.
And the internet is forever.
That's exactly right. And so you have that porn, like non-consensual porn that's been uploaded. You secretly videotape your girlfriend when she's drunk and you do stuff to her. And now all of a sudden that's porn that's being viewed by tens of thousands of people. But the scary thing with AI now is the deep fake. So if I have a grudge against you, I can take your face, have you do all kinds of horrible things in a video, and then extort you to do whatever I want you to do.
Yeah. Oh my God. No, it's horrifying. I have my friends who have kids who are teenagers, and I say, hey, the internet is forever. Never, ever, ever. The boy you think is madly in love with you, hate to say it, but you're going to have 10 more boyfriends after that guy. And where are all those pictures going to go that you just sent to him?
Yeah, right. Exactly right.
Or her, depending.
Yeah, I know. And I think the more children, this is why kind of the awareness stuff is so important. Why we have, like the film like Maya, where we have a panel discussion afterwards, because you need to flesh out these things. And the more parents understand, and the more kids understand that these are the tactics that are used. Every girl that I've ever met who's a survivor of being trafficked, they all had alarm bells go off. They all had red flags about this relationship, but they overrode it. He's so nice, he's so cute, whatever it was, but they overrode those feelings. But if they hear very clearly, these are the tactics that are used. This is what a guy's going to say. This is how he's going to treat you in order to manipulate you. Then there's a little bit more weight to the alarm bells and to the red flags. So they're going to say, wait a minute, this sounds exactly like what I heard. So there is kind of there is a protection that comes from awareness of these tactics that are used. I've talked to a few people, Julia's friends, but I really want to see a comedy made about human trafficking, which seems very counterintuitive. But if you could show a kid who's totally on to what this guy is saying and doing, but you turn it into a comedy, but you make it, this guy is really foolish, what he's trying to do, and you outsmart him. I think because we need to find other ways of getting the messaging across. Heavy, depressing, serious movies, are not everyone's cup of tea, and they're not going to necessarily see these things. But we can get the messaging across in other genres, I think.
Yeah, I took it in college. I took a class. It was the psychology of advertising. It was fascinating. And the thing about gloom and doom and horror is it actually sometimes can do the opposite, because people want to feel immortal, or that they can be, better or bigger, or their ideas are more. And so that's why, we drink alcohol and smoke cigarettes and do all this stuff. Advertising is geared to sort of tempt I can do that. No, you can't. Yes, I can. No, I can't. So all that negativity certainly, I think, can backfire, and that kids who are stubborn because they're learning who they are going to fight against it, because they're going to think they're smarter than that, or that it wouldn't happen to them, or any number of things. But it feeds into that feeling of immortality.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah. So much, I don't know, just so much is having a trusted voice, someone that you can talk to. And I think that's, and a lot of that is what's missing now in the world. It's like, it's kind of all or nothing. And people are going to online to these virtual relationships more than.
Well, it's not just the kids that are buried in their devices. I walk the park almost every day and see parents completely ignoring their children. They're just looking at their phones. They're not even, I was walking behind this dad. He was pushing a stroller with a little tiny tot, and then his little maybe 5-year-old girl is sort of wandering. He was buried in his phone. I could have literally walked up and taken that girl away, and he wouldn't have known for 10, 15 minutes. He had no awareness. It's not just the kids that are buried.
And I think this is one of the points, and this is why educating the kind of adults is really important, because you're expecting kids to be responsible to a level that they're really not. They're curious, they're discovering the world. But if you're on your device all the time, then you're setting them up, to do the same, and that you're prioritizing this thing over time with them. All of those things have, problematic consequences for children. Like they're seeing their parents. We need to start being much more disciplined as adults.
Present. We need to be present. So present. Yeah.
Growing up, we had, we'd have dinner together all around the table, and you'd have this, and it was during Watergate, we'd have these wild conversations. And my youngest brother, he would write these stories about, tape recordings, secret tape recordings and stuff that he would hear over the dinner table. And it was very entertaining to his teachers, like the stories that he would write, but there was all this give and take. There was all this, support system, or, in our relationships with each other. And we didn't have those distractions that are so common now. I think the thing too, with, so many dads, the way that they're bonding with their kids is playing video games together, which is better than nothing, but it's this reinforcement that everything is, something else that you're doing and not physically engaging. And especially for boys, they need the physical engagement. But I find it also really hopeful. I mean, I'm just a diehard optimist, which is, I'm surrounded by all this stuff. But like the more and more you start to see this is what really makes sense, then there's a hope that we can actually get to that. I think when everything is this dark mystery and we have no idea where we're going and everything looks horrible, the direction we're heading in, that's really doom and gloom. But to me, it's like, man, I'm seeing the best dads. We hear about African-American, fathers and what's happening to the African-American home. The best dads I've seen are a Black father who's really engaged with his kids, and he's spending every extra moment that he has, he's with these kids. I do this thing now where if I see a father and kids together, I go up and I talk to the dad, thank the dad. Like, man, I'm so inspired to see you together with your kids, because we don't do that enough. There's not enough, acknowledgement of, you're taking your time that you could be spending doing something else, and you're spending it with kids. And I just find so much hope in today as well. That
is a weird thing, that for women, there is this idea that, okay, women naturally will care for their kids, but dads are babysitting, or, oh, I have to look after the kids. It's like, they're your freaking kids. Of course you have to. You're not babysitting. They're your children.
Well, that's part of the con. I think that's part of the con, is that we see that the father is kind of the bumbling idiot babysitter of the kids, instead of the one who really loves every moment that he's with his kids. And I just find so many men become a distorted version of themselves. Like, we have these older men who they're divorced, their kids hate them, they don't have any solid, lasting relationships, which is actually the source of human happiness by far. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the Harvard study that's been going on for over 80 years. And the conclusion is long-lasting relationships are what give us the most happiness as human beings. But these quickies, I mean, I heard in Germany they've got drive-through brothels. I mean, give me a break. But it's like everything is.
In Japan, they have to teach people how to cuddle and have that kind of intimacy now, because there is it's just not happening. That people don't know how to talk to each other or look at each other, or they have classes and cuddle rooms and things.
I was looking at the top 10 searches in pornography now, and the 3 of the top 10 are robots, animation, and AI. I mean, it's not even a human being. Our fantasy world is now not even human. Well, until AI becomes sentient, understanding of itself, which is probably in the pipeline, I'd rather have a robot getting this stuff happen to them than a human child, for sure. But yeah, to me, I see it as pretty messy. I'm glad people like you are out there trying to combat it. I think, man, we need more of the combating and more answers and a way to hobble the money-making aspect of it, because ultimately that seems to be the thing that drives it. Yeah. We need a partnership. There needs to be legislation. There needs to be, all of those things together. But ultimately, it's I just think the greatest impact that we're going to have is when we're raising children who don't feel like it's okay for them to go out and, rape a 10-year-old and, or feel that they need to go be this kind of person for some boy that they've met online. So it's, the more healing that we can do within our homes, where we recognize the value of each other and support each other. And, even if there's a divorce, if you treat your ex with some civility, children need to see that. Otherwise, they're growing up with no hope that love is even real or that relationship ever lasts. And, we need to start changing what we're modeling for kids as well.
I agree. Yeah. Patrick, tell people how they might find you.
My organization is FatherCon, and we have a website that's www.father-con.org. My email address is patrick@father-con.org. And I love interacting with people and hearing what they have to say and things just like you do, and we're all human. We're all sharing this one planet Earth. And I really hope that people will contact me and we can interact.
If you or anybody is in need of help, is there a number they can call?
Well, if they do reach out to me, then I'll direct them to whoever. But there's some great organizations that I partner with in Los Angeles, like Saving Innocence, Forgotten Child Inc., Forgotten Child Inc. They're a great organization that work with people who are being victimized. My focus is on the prevention of it, is raising awareness so kids don't get trafficked. That's my lane. But there's a lot of organizations that work with, supporting someone who's being trafficked and getting them out. There are really great people. There are great people in law enforcement. There are great people who really understand this issue and understand what kids are going through. Clay Cranford is a great guy. He was 20 years as a sheriff. We do a lot together. He's going to be one of the speakers at FatherCon in May. But he wrote a book on parenting in the digital age, like what parents really need to understand that their kids are going through. There's great resources out there. When we have FatherCon, we have about 40 resource organizations, agencies, anything that's going to help strengthen families and protect kids. We want people to attend and get that information into their hands and walk out of there being inspired that actually, we can get things right. We can. There's enough data to support now how we need to be treating each other as human beings that makes sense and is going to make a huge change in the future for us.
Yeah. So any dads listening, go to FatherCon.
Yeah, it's going to be May 24th and 25th at Cal State Dominguez Hills.
Never too early, never too late.
Amen. Yeah, fathers matter. It's really true. And a lot of fathers have checked out and they need to check back in because their kids really need them. Yeah.
Patrick, thank you for your time. I'll put links. I'll also in the preamble of this episode, I'll put some phone numbers for people if they need services. And thank you for listening, everybody. It's important. I know this is a tricky episode. There's a lot of heavy topic going on, but it's so important. And if we plug our ears to it, nothing's ever going to get solved. We have to talk about it.
That's right. I'm so grateful to you for doing this. Because it really is important, and it is one of the heavier topics. But there's so much light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, there's just so many people are waking up. People are, learning things that they need to learn about how we need to live to be hey humans. And I love it.
Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.